Most people believe that the voice inside their head is one of the few things every human being shares. It narrates our decisions, replays old conversations, argues with itself before making a choice, and sometimes refuses to stay quiet when the world finally goes silent. We grow up assuming that this invisible companion is part of being human. But hidden beneath ordinary conversation is a surprising psychological reality. Not everyone has that voice. For some people, there is no constant internal narrator, no running commentary, no silent sentences forming in the background. Their minds work, remember, plan, and feel, but they do it in a completely different way. And the existence of these minds forces us to question one of the deepest assumptions we have ever made about consciousness itself. What makes this even more fascinating is that many people spend decades without realizing that their inner experience is unusual. A person with a vivid inner monologue often assumes everyone else is hearing the same silent stream of words. At the very same time, someone without it may assume that expressions like talking to yourself or hearing your own thoughts are simply metaphors. Two people can sit across from each other, have identical jobs, similar intelligence, and equally rich emotional lives, while the architecture of their minds operates in radically different ways. It is one of the strangest examples of how human psychology hides in plain sight. The first misconception is that a missing inner monologue means an empty or less active mind. In reality, the brain does not require language to think. Long before children learn to speak fluently, they recognize patterns, solve simple problems, read emotions, and navigate the world through images, sensations, and intuition. Human cognition was never built around words alone. Language is only one of several tools the brain uses to represent reality. For some people, thoughts arrive as flashes of visual scenes. Others experience abstract concepts that feel almost impossible to translate into sentences. Some process information through emotions or bodily sensations before language ever appears. The subconscious mind is constantly at work, even when it does not narrate what it is doing. This is where psychology becomes deeply counterintuitive. We often confuse awareness with language because words are easy to remember. If you silently tell yourself, "I need to buy groceries after work," it feels as though the sentence created the thought. But brain science suggests something more mysterious may be happening. The intention often forms first, beneath conscious awareness, while the inner voice arrives a fraction of a second later, almost like a storyteller trying to explain a decision that has already begun. In other words, the voice in your head may not be the author of your mind. It may simply be its narrator. And if that is true, then people who do not have an inner monologue are not missing the essence of thought at all. They may simply experience it before it is translated into words, and that changes everything we think we know about human nature. If the human mind can function without an internal narrator, then a deeper question begins to emerge. What is the inner monologue actually doing? Most people instinctively believe that the little voice in their head is the source of reason, self-control, and identity. It feels like the center of the self. But cognitive psychology paints a far more complex picture. The brain is less like a single storyteller and more like an orchestra made up of many independent systems working together beneath conscious awareness. Memory, emotion, pattern recognition, habit formation, and decision-making often happen long before the conscious mind puts them into words. The inner voice may simply be the part of the brain that translates these hidden processes into a narrative that feels understandable. This explains one of the strangest experiences many people have without ever noticing it. Think about a moment when you instantly recognized a familiar face in a crowded street. You did not silently describe every feature to yourself before knowing who the person was. The recognition happened immediately, and only afterward did your inner voice say, "I know them." The same thing happens when a musician knows exactly which note sounds wrong. When an athlete reacts to a fast-moving ball before consciously analyzing its direction, or when someone senses that a conversation feels unsafe without being able to explain why. Much of human behavior is driven by systems that operate beneath language. For people without a strong inner monologue, these non-verbal systems may simply play a larger role in everyday thinking. This also changes the way we understand memory. People with active internal speech often replay the past through conversations. They mentally relive arguments, repeat old mistakes, or rehearse things they wish they had said. The mind becomes a theater where the same dialogue can play over and over again. But people who do not naturally think in words may revisit memories through images, emotional impressions, or disconnected scenes. They may remember the atmosphere of a room, the expression on someone's face, or the feeling in their chest more vividly than the exact sentences that were spoken. Neither approach is inherently better. They are simply different forms of mental representation, each shaping how a person experiences reality. Ironically, one of the greatest strengths of an inner monologue can also become one of its greatest weaknesses. The ability to create a detailed internal narrative allows for planning, reflection, and self-awareness, but it also creates endless opportunities for rumination. The same mechanism that helps someone prepare for an important presentation can trap them in a cycle of replaying embarrassment, anxiety, or regret. A single awkward conversation can echo through the mind for days because the brain keeps reconstructing it with language. Behavioral psychology has long observed that the stories people tell themselves often become more influential than the events themselves. The internal narrator can become an internal critic, constantly evaluating, predicting, and questioning. Now consider the opposite experience. If your mind does not automatically generate a stream of verbal commentary, many of those repetitive loops may never fully form. This does not mean people without an inner monologue are free from stress or emotional pain. They can still experience anxiety, sadness, fear, and uncertainty, but those emotions may emerge as physical sensations or intuitive feelings, instead of endless internal conversations. Some describe knowing they are worried without hearing anxious sentences in their mind. Others report that decisions appear almost fully formed, as though the answer quietly surfaces from somewhere below consciousness. To someone with a constant inner dialogue, this can sound almost impossible. Yet from the perspective of neuroscience, it may simply reflect a different balance between conscious language and subconscious processing. Perhaps the most surprising consequence of this difference appears in social relationships. We tend to assume that everyone interprets emotions, conflict, and communication in the same way we do. A person with a vivid inner monologue may spend hours analyzing a short text message, constructing theories about hidden meanings, replaying every word, and imagining future conversations before they happen. Meanwhile, someone without that internal narration might process the same interaction much more directly, focusing on observable behavior rather than imagined subtext. Neither person is necessarily more rational or more emotional. They are simply using different mental tools to understand the same world. And because these tools are invisible, people often mistake cognitive differences for personality differences. This hidden diversity reveals something profound about human nature. We often define intelligence, self-awareness, or emotional depth by comparing other minds to our own. But psychology repeatedly shows that the brain is remarkably flexible. There is no single correct format for thought. Some minds think in language, others in images, others through feelings, patterns, or abstract concepts that resist description altogether. The inner monologue is not the operating system of consciousness. It is only one interface among many. And once you realize that, an even bigger mystery begins to unfold. If two people can experience reality through entirely different internal worlds while appearing identical on the outside, how many other invisible differences shape the way we understand ourselves and each other? The story becomes even more fascinating when we stop asking whether an inner monologue exists and start asking why evolution would allow such different ways of thinking to survive. Human behavior did not develop to create one perfect mind. It developed to create adaptable minds. In a world full of changing environments and unpredictable challenges, cognitive diversity may have been one of humanity's greatest advantages. Some individuals may have excelled by carefully analyzing situations through internal dialogue, planning every step before acting. Others may have relied more heavily on rapid pattern recognition, visual imagination, and instinctive decision-making. A group containing both styles of thinkers would often outperform a group where everyone processed information in exactly the same way. This idea helps explain why people without an inner monologue can still be highly creative, deeply reflective, and exceptionally intelligent. Creativity itself is rarely a purely verbal process. A painter does not always think in sentences before seeing a new image. An inventor may suddenly grasp the shape of a solution without consciously explaining it. A chess player often recognizes the right move before being able to justify it. In many cases, the conscious explanation arrives after the insight itself. The subconscious mind is constantly organizing information, connecting distant memories, and building patterns beneath awareness. The final answer simply rises to the surface. For some people, it arrives wrapped in words. For others, it arrives as certainty. Modern life, however, creates an interesting tension between these different mental worlds. Society rewards language. Schools often measure understanding through written answers and spoken explanations. Job interviews expect people to describe their strengths and thought processes. Personal development advice frequently encourages individuals to change the conversation in your head, assuming that everyone has one. As a result, many people who lack a strong inner monologue may grow up believing there is something unusual or even wrong about the way they think. In reality, they may simply be translating experiences into language only when communication becomes necessary, while the actual thinking happened silently and effortlessly long before. This realization carries an important lesson for relationships as well. Many conflicts arise because people assume others experience the world exactly as they do. Someone who constantly rehearses conversations may mistake a quiet partner for emotionally distant, when that person simply does not process feelings through words. A parent may wonder why a child struggles to explain what they are thinking, not realizing that the child's thoughts exist primarily as images or sensations rather than sentences. Understanding these hidden differences can create empathy. It reminds us that communication is not merely the exchange of words. It is the translation of entirely private inner realities that no one else can directly observe. And perhaps that is the deepest psychological truth hidden inside this topic. The voice in your head feels so intimate, so constant, that it becomes easy to mistake it for your identity. But identity is larger than language. Before a thought becomes a sentence, before a feeling becomes a story, before an idea can even be explained, the mind is already alive with silent activity. The brain is always predicting, remembering, comparing, creating, and adapting. Consciousness is not a single voice echoing through an empty room. It is an invisible landscape where countless processes work together, most of them beyond the reach of words. The real discovery is not that some people live without an inner monologue. The real discovery is that the human mind was never designed around one single experience of reality. Every person walks through the world carrying a private universe that nobody else can fully enter. Some of those universes are filled with constant dialogue. Others are painted with images, emotions, intuitions, and quiet understanding. Yet all of them produce love, fear, curiosity, ambition, and the search for meaning. And that should change the way we think about human psychology forever. Because the greatest illusion the mind creates is not the voice inside your head. It is the belief that everyone else hears the same one. Once that illusion disappears, you begin to see human nature differently. You realize that understanding psychology is not about discovering how all minds work the same way. It's about recognizing the extraordinary ways they can work differently and still arrive at the same destination, a life shaped by thought, emotion, connection, and the endless mystery of being conscious at all.